Okay. So first of all, I want to say a big welcome to Susan for doing us the honor and giving us this lovely opportunity to discuss the wonderful Alchemy Fire Murder. I really enjoyed the first book, The Sacred Well Murders, and the second book as much, if not even more, because you feel that you are um befriending the characters. The characters are now part of your life in a way. You know more about them, and you're looking forward to their new mysteries and to what they're up to next. So it's just been lovely. Thank you so much. For those of you who haven't read the book yet, well, I don't have the book, but I have my Kindle. And I just want to say that it is really unputdownable. It's wonderful. It's amazing. Susan was all over the place. So there are so many themes that we can talk about today. And, we might ask the audience, those who have read the novel or those who have started reading it, what are some of the themes that they have found and what is it that they would like to know more about? We want to know also more about Susan's journey into this novel and maybe the prompts and the inspiration that was behind it.
Mm.
So without further ado, I will present Susan and then hear what Susan has to say before we open the floor to everyone else. So, Susan Rowland is author of books on Jung, the feminine, and the arts, including Jung, A Feminist Revision, which came out in 2002, Remembering Dionysus in 2017, and Jungian Literary Criticism, The Essential Guide in 2019. She teaches on the hybrid programs at Pacifica Graduate Institute in California. After her recent theorizing on Jungian art-space research, she now explores feminine heroism, trauma, and the climate emergency through writing the Mary Wandwalker mystery series. The Sacred Well Murders, which came out in 2022, is followed by what we will be discussing today, the Alchemy Fire Murder in 2023, linking alchemy, America, and wildfires. And ironically, speaking of wildfires, I hope you're all breathing okay today. If you're close to the site of the fires and all that. So it's just the perfect time to talk about your novel, Susan. And without further ado, with great honor, we would like to hear you now.
Thank you so much, Rula, and thanks to you. I'm awed by your energy and all that you are doing in the creative and Jungian and artistic world. The Alchemy Fire Murder. It begins in 1399 in Oxford, and you might be able to see that the cover has an Oxford college on it. And in 1399, in the story, two women dressed as nuns arrive at the door of a new building, which will be a student residence. And they've brought an alchemy scroll, which is a gift from one of the founders of this new residence, Mother Julian of Norwich, who was an actual historical person and the first woman whose book in English we still have. She wrote a very famous book of feminist theology. And she was an anchorite, which meant that she was walled in to a church for her life. But she corresponded a lot. And in my story, she corresponds with this builder in Oxford, and they decide to build this student residence. And this is based on an actual student residence that became a college. In my story, this student residence becomes St. Julian's College after Mother Julian. 6 centuries later, Mary Wandwalker, my chief detective, is asked to visit St. Julian's College, which is actually her alma mater, and she's shown the manuscript. And immediately she realizes that it's a fake. It's not the original manuscript. But and she learns to her surprise that the original was stolen 300 years before and taken to America, where it has now been located in a museum in Los Angeles. And would Mary Wand Walker, who has some expertise with documents, would she go and get this manuscript back? Because there's a legend about it that suggests that it has healing powers, and the college is very short of money. Its mortgages have been bought by an American corporation who wants the manuscript to experiment on it for its healing properties. So Mary agrees to go and get this manuscript. She also learns that the manuscript has a secret that has been passed down orally since all through the 6th centuries, passed down orally in a group of women who live close to Oxford, and were at the time were called alchemists, and now openly are able to call themselves witches. Unfortunately, the woman who carries the secret has been kidnapped. And so while Mary goes to Los Angeles to try and get the alchemy manuscript back, her 2 companions, the middle-aged or woman in her 40s, Caroline, and Anna, try to get back the woman who has been kidnapped. And this leads Caroline to go undercover in a very unpleasant mental hospital. So Mary is in Los Angeles, and she does find the manuscript, but before she can get permission to take it away, the young man looking after it, an intern from England, is murdered, and the manuscript disappears. And Mary feels a connection with the young man. She's also rather shocked by the Los Angeles police, who exhibit racism towards the young man and his brother, who is immediately taken as the first suspect. This young man and his brother are African British, Black British, as we would say. So Mary gets involved in looking after the young man's brother, and eventually committed to trying to find the murderer herself. So the story comes together and splits apart between Los Angeles and the surrounding countryside, and Oxford and the surrounding countryside. Towards the end of the story, there is a wildfire in the Los Angeles area. Anna, whom you may remember is one of the detectives, she's got hold of the manuscript. She's holed up in a valley near Los Angeles that is surrounded by wildfire. And Mary and Caroline go to find her.
Yeah, she said, can we just put up a permanent one? The one that I just put up fell. So
Sorry, could you make sure everyone is muted, please?
No.
Thank you.
I'm a little irritated that the cost that we spent for,
I think you can mute everybody yourself,
Oh,
Rula, can
yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, now I can see. Okay, yeah. All right, thanks.
Yeah. So that's kind of how the story moves. And we meet quite a few characters. The kind of central core is between the 3 women. Mary, who is an older woman who's kind of failed to make a family, but she has encountered her the son she gave up for adoption. He married before he was unfortunately murdered. And Mary is working with her son's widow, Caroline, and her son's girlfriend, Anna. Anna and Caroline are now in a romantic relationship. And I do find myself writing about gay relationships. That may be one of the things that I'm not doing quite so well, and I'd be interested to hear about that sort of thing. Other characters that come out in the book is Mary's ex-boss, Mr. Jeffries, who's in the government and knows a lot, and is kind of involved in trying to get the manuscript back, get the alchemy scroll back. And there is Janet, who is the witch who has been kidnapped, and she is then rescued. Janet is rescued by Caroline, and Anna also gets involved in the rescue, but in a way that really, really upsets Caroline, and they have a row which isn't sorted out for some time. And of course, there are younger characters. There is Sam, who is the brother of the murdered young man, who's known as DP. Their family name is Murphy, and DP is Dennis Patrick Murphy. Sam is his brother, and at one point the detectives and Sam go to stay with the witches just outside Oxford, and Sam meets a kind of mingles somewhat uneasily to start with the young women who are being treated by the witches. The witches have this long history of magic, which goes back centuries and centuries. But in the 21st century, they are also trained counselors, and they take in young women who have come out of trafficking to try to help them get back into a life that can be happy and healthful for them. So this is unlike my other Mary Wandwalker stories, this one takes place on 2 continents. I'm also working on 2 other stories, one about the element of earth and one about the element of air. This, of course, is a story about the element of fire. And the first one, The Sacred Well Murders, was about the element of water. So there is a deep kind of alchemical theme in all of these stories. There is also, in this book, an alchemical theme in the actual progress of the story, because here is, right, okay, well, you can't really see this, but the stages of the story goes through alchemical stages. So we begin with Massa Confusa, starting alchemy, where everything is all kind of mixed up. And then we have a solutio, everything becomes liquid. Then we have a putrefactio, that's the murder, things die, but that's not the end. There's a calcinatio, there's an application of great heat, for example. So alchemy, as people will know, is an ancient process that is fascinatingly multicultural. Alchemy did not begin in one place and get transmitted all around the world. There is a long history of alchemy in India, in China, in Africa. And the alchemy that the Europeans got hold of came largely from Islam, came largely from the Arab lands of the early medieval period, and eventually becomes very powerful in Europe of the 17th century. And this brings us back to the stealing of the alchemy manuscript. In the story, an alchemist in the 17th century steals the manuscript and leaves a perfect copy. The copy was done for him by an African alchemist called Robert Limor. And Robert Limor and the alchemist who initiates this, called Francis Andrew Ransom, they go to colonial America, colonial Connecticut, where Francis Andrew Ransom uses the alchemy manuscript in his practice of making medicines. He was a kind of alchemist who made medicines and dispensed them to people, very much like a kind of modern pharmacist or an apothecary. And some alchemists did this. Some alchemists were very much associated with medicine and makers of medicine. That's the story. There is actually a historical basis for this, and history is a part of this novel in a way that means a great deal to me, because part of the inspiration of this novel was my discovery of a book called Prospero's America, which I thank in the acknowledgements, in which tells the story of a real alchemist who in the 17th century moved from London to Connecticut, took a barrel full of manuscripts and practiced as a physician dispensing medicines. His name was John Winthrop Jr. He became governor of the colony of Connecticut. He wanted to make that colony an alchemy colony, and it didn't work out, but he did quite a lot of alchemy at that time, and there is a material legacy of that alchemy there in Connecticut today. That's a fascinating story. It's also a very poignant story, as Prospero's America says, because the alchemy that John Winthrop Jr. brought to colonial America had real similarities to the religion of the Native Americans of that area. The Native Americans believed in a great spirit in ways quite similar to Winthrop's understanding of the anima mundi. So we have here something that didn't happen, something that could have happened. There could have been a real meeting of Native American religion and spirituality and practices with the alchemy of that era, and that could have led to different possibilities for what colonialism came to mean. Now, we know that it didn't happen, that there wasn't a recognition and a valuing of Native American spirituality. Rather, there was a kind of brutal colonization. But that possibility is, it seems to me, it really inspired me in terms of writing this story. Also, of course, as I have already mentioned, Julian of Norwich was a real person, and Oxford is full of buildings and colleges from that medieval period, and none of them celebrates the feminine. There is a Magdalen College, Mary Magdalene, but I wanted to reimagine the historical tradition that produced Oxford and put in a much more feminine approach to the divine, which is very much present in Julian of Norwich's work. We don't know that Julian of Norwich had any contact with alchemy. However, her approach to the feminine and the divine is quite similar to ideas of the feminine being part of alchemical processes of transformation and change. So another thing that people might want to ask me about is Jungian arts-based research, because I am writing these novels within the framework of Jungian arts-based research, which is using Jungian psychology to facilitate creativity in a way that is also meaning-making, in a way that is also knowledge-making. And there is this thing called arts-based research, which is relatively new, which is gathering strength in universities, often associated with social science departments. Arts-based research is very like alchemy. And yet the arts-based research people haven't really taken on the potentialities of Jung. So I've been trying to put these together to offer a more powerful and cosmological and truly alchemical arts-based research. I'm going to mention two other things and then throw this open. The climate emergency is an important part of what I'm trying to do with these novels, because the climate emergency, we can trace the climate and issues around the climate in our history. In my research for the air story that has not yet been published, I found some fascinating stuff about witches who were said to control the climate in the medieval period, and that will kind of come up. But I wanted to explore and, in a sense, hold the climate emergency within the story, within the fiction, because the climate emergency is such a huge and sometimes frightening issue that we need a way of approaching it. We need a way of thinking about it. We need a way of keeping it as part of what's going on here and now in our lives. And of course, I'm writing mystery fiction. I'm writing detective stories. They have murders in them. You know, big tradition here of fiction about crime. And yet, what does that say about the environment? There are mystery stories about environmental crimes, but the bigger issue of the climate, that is something that I think mystery fiction, detective fiction will be including. And of course, in alchemy, everything is included. You know, alchemy is about fire, but it's also about recovering from the fire. It's about floods, if you like, but it is also about recovering from the floods. So there's something there. And of course, in this story, as my main characters learn a bit about alchemy, they learn the attitude to fire and restoration that is not so foreign, that seems to be something that people haven't continued with into the modern times. So finally, as I've just been saying, I'm also really interested in genre. And if you are someone who is interested in Jung, then you will see that genre is archetypal, that genre is repeated patterns in the arts. And here we have the genre of the fictional detective as some kind of hero. and that therefore there is something kind of very deep going on about how genres change, how genres modify, how genres appear and disappear. So I've done a lot of thinking about detective fiction, and detective fiction is actually quite complex. There are all sorts of different types, and people always say that my stories are cozies, and they are and they aren't. They are cozies in the sense that it signifies that there is a positive ending, and that's very important to me, to bring it to a positive ending. They're not cozies in that they do deal with they deal with some really tough things, like having characters who've been trafficked, for example. So I'm kind of working with the edge of that genre, but I'm very interested that the genre of the cozies is so popular, and I see it as a manifestation of the Holy Grail myth, that the detective is like the Grail Knight, and the Grail Knight is trying to find the right question, the right words to find the Grail. The Grail in the cozy is the solution that heals the wasteland. And this idea of a wasteland and healing the wasteland, this goes back to the ancient Celts. This is thousands of years old, and yet it could hardly be more contemporary that we have this story about the necessity to heal the wasteland and why the wasteland has got where it is. And the earlier version of the story explains very clearly that the land is waste because of the rape of the feminine. That an earlier version of the story locates it as the land becomes waste because the king, who should accept a cup of water from the sacred well given to him by a maiden, instead of accepting the cup of water, he rapes the maiden. His knights go and do the same to all the other well maidens, and the land becomes waste because these sacred waters that keep the land fertile by being links to the Celtic otherworld, these all dry up. So if you commit an atrocity, then there is the trauma breaks the connection to the other world, which one could call the collective unconscious, if you want to think psychologically about this. And so what is needed is what is going to reconnect these parts of the psyche that have been split apart. So I think that's enough for now. I've suggested things people might want to ask about. You are free to say anything you like, ask anything you like, and I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Susan. We actually have a question by Glenda. I think I saw a question here. Yes. Witches who controlled the climate in medieval times. Could that be early geoengineering?
Well, it certainly could. This is more about blaming witches, which won't surprise anybody who knows about the history of witchcraft. So there were, in the sort of early modern period, there was a period called the Mini Ice Age, where Europe in particular was much, much colder than it had been for a couple of centuries. And one of the things that happened at the time was that people blamed witches for making it cold. There was also a specific instance that I think involved James the Fourth of Scotland, who was really into witchcraft, and he was going on a voyage, I think, to Scandinavia, and there was a lot of ice in the sea, which held up the voyage, and he specifically blamed the witches for that. So witches were believed to have power over the weather. And in fact, there is reference to this in the Scottish play, where there's something about the witches and sailors. So they were believed to have power over the weather, which could even extend to the climate. It's an interesting prophetic perspective on man-made climate change.
Interesting indeed. Susan, we have Vic's hand up. So Vic,
Hi,
you might
Vic.
like to.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, Susan. I know we've chatted briefly on Twitter, and it's an absolute delight to hear you speak today. So thank you very much for your generous time. I'm about about a third of the way into Alchemy Fire Murder, which I'm enjoying. One of the reasons that I'm so interested in what you're doing is that I'm doing arts-based research for my PhD at Falmouth Uni, where I'm writing, or will be writing, a supernatural crime novel. Now, I need to actually knuckle down to that fairly soon, because I've spent the entire first 18 months doing critical work, which is where my comfort zone is, and I realize that the procrastination is actually telling me something. But here's my question. Thinking about crime and ghost stories, then, from the perspective of Jungian arts-based research, have you got any ideas for me, other than you've just spoken about the Grail myth, for structures that might work well for this? So you talked a bit about the cozy and the detective novel. What I'm really just kind of playing around with at the moment, not struggling with per se, but just kind of playing around with, like, well, okay, how am I going to make, I mean, it's a feminist project, and I know how I can make it feminist, but I'm struggling a little bit more, especially as I'm relatively new to Jungian psychology myself. So, can you give me any tips for, like, what you would expect to see? Like, let's say you were my external examiner, right? Which you never know. What would you be wanting to see that would scream to you, this is definitely a Jungian, supernatural crime story, or ghost story, or crime novel? Do you know what I'm saying? Are there any kind of key points that you could point me to that make sure you get that in?
Well, I mean, Vic, and everyone knows that you don't prescribe things for art. You don't make lists and say stick them all in, and however I think if you're doing Jungian arts-based research, the essential thing is to have a psychological dimension.
Right.
And that does not have to be mentioning any Jungian terms.
No.
But and it can include things that are very good for actual novels, like mystery, the unknown, multiple possibilities. When Jung started to develop some Jungian ideas, he heard this woman's voice in his head, and he also came up with this vision of a male figure he called Philemon. And he actually says this is in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I was like a patient in analysis with a ghost and a woman.
Right, okay.
And the woman bit is his kind of misogyny coming in.
Right.
But he believed for a while, and in fact kind of carried on believing, that this Philemon vision that he saw was a ghost.
Okay.
So you've got ghosts.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you want to make it a ghost story, the whole question, then the writer has the question, has to kind of face the fact: is this going to be a ghost where the story validates ghosts as ghosts, or is this going to be a ghost where it's not the novel itself is not saying this is a dead person for sure, you know, that we're in this world of dead people coming in and talking. Now, if you're doing a supernatural ghost story, you might want to do that. You might want to go all the way with ghosts of dead people. A more Jungian approach would be that there are a number of possibilities that this ghost could be.
Right.
So there's that. There's also, I think,
That's good.
trauma.
Absolutely, which is huge in Gothic anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And obviously there's lots of you know,
Well, and in crime.
stories with a kind of feminist take on trauma.
Yeah.
So trauma does strange things to the mind. Trauma can result in people hearing voices. Dreams can become strangely prophetic, and that's something that's kind of Jungian. So there are quite a number of things to choose. You might be interested in Michelle Roberts's books, early novels. I actually wrote on these for my doctoral thesis. I recommend.
What was that name again?
Michelle Roberts.
Thank you.
With one L, the Michelle. It's the French spelling.
Okay.
She's a feminist novelist. Her early work was much influenced by Jung. She has a classic Jungian feminist novel called The Wild Girl, which is
fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I also recommend In the Red Kitchen, where it's very feminist. You'll certainly get that. And in it, there are ghosts who could be archetypes, and you know, it's
lovely.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Lovely. Yeah. That's really super helpful. Thank you for your generous answer there. That's a lot for me to take away with Susan. I'm sure I'll be in touch in due course. Thanks so much. It's been absolutely delightful. Thank you.
Okay. Teresa.
That was a fabulous question and answer. I felt like I was in a course, you know, listening. So thank you for that. The question I have is about alchemy in general, the microcosm and the macrocosm. And, I have a background in studies around fetal development, and I was always fascinated at the point in time where the fetal heart started beating. That shift from what might be an inanimate type beingness into now the potential for life. And to me, that feels like part of some kind of alchemical process, that movement. And it feels like now moving towards the general feeling that the stages of alchemy that you were describing, it feels like that liquefaction process could be prolonged, you know, like a really prolonged feeling. And I wondered inside of you as the writer about what shifts, you know, like how do you feel that shift now you're moving into this next stage? I'm very interested in this, not only for you personally, but I'm thinking about culturally, like where we are, particularly in the United States, where we are culturally, and where we're going. You know, it feels like we have really moved into a fiery liquid state, you know, where it's chaos, you know, and nothing's getting clear. So I'm interested in your thoughts in general about that kind of movement.
Well, that's huge. That is a huge topic, obviously. Let me give you a few things trying to respond to everything you've said. You talk about microcosm and macrocosm, and being interested in fetal development. And it reminds me of these alchemy images, woodcuts, and Jung has some of them in his collected works on alchemy, where there is a child or a little person in a womb-like vase or vase. that alchemy seems to have a sense of the embryo, but sees it as a little person, not what we think of, not what we know an embryo actually looks like. But that is a kind of fascinating part of alchemy, and it's innate to alchemy that it's not just about the vase and the little person inside. It's about everything. It's about everything being interconnected. And what concerns me about the contemporary United States and the ban on abortion is how disconnected it is. The idea that the important thing is to simply ban abortion with the assumption that life begins at conception, but there is no discussion of the family or the world that the child is going to come into, with America being an extremely rich country where children go hungry. A lot of children go hungry all the time, and families, most of the families who use abortion do it to protect the family that they have, so they can't afford another child. So you ask from my point of view, and I think there is what's part of Jungian arts-based research, and why I think it's important to bring Jung into arts-based research, is this idea of the conception of the work and the point at which the work takes on a life of its own. And all artists know that the art will take on a life of its own. But that notion of a relationship between the artist and the art that comes to include the world beyond, that you get to have a real feeling of being in an interconnected universe. That is something that it's something that non-Western cultures always know and have very rich cultures about, but it's something that we need to rediscover or to find these days. So that in Jungian arts-based research, the ideas of it helped me value when the writing took on a life of its own, when things happened that I hadn't planned or expected in the story. So in The Sacred Well Murders, this was very vivid because I killed a character off and they wouldn't stay dead. They kept popping back and saying, no, I'm in this scene, I'm in this scene. In this story, I found that there was things going on in the world that had to be in the story. And so racism and white supremacy needed to be in the story. And then it wasn't until I finished the story that I realized that this was very much a kind of personal myth story that was really a cultural myth story. So there was a kind of mythic thing going on behind under the surface that wasn't visible to me until I'd finished. And it's those types of things that are fostered by a kind of Jungian approach where you value synchronicities, where you might be engaged in active imagination, where you might be paying attention to your dreams, where you might be getting images through the body, and where you become aware that things want to be in the story. Sometimes things insist being in the story, and you're open to that. And so you become alchemically involved with the world. So I think that's the best I could do with that, Teresa. I hope it in some way, answers your question. Hello, Godfrey.
And thank you so much. There's so much more, but
Yeah.
let others have their turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And I see a question in the chat box by Grace. Hello, Grace. Grace Topping is here with us today.
Hello,
Another
Grace.
fantastic mystery writer.
Grace. Yes.
Grace says, I would like to talk about the designation of your book as a cozy.
Yes. Well, perhaps you should talk, Grace, then first. No, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay. First, let me just say I've been reading your book and enjoying it very much, Susan.
Thank you.
But I want to caution you on the use of cozy for your book. I write cozy mysteries, and I will tell you, we are at the bottom of the totem pole and the bottom of the heap as far as respect for the genre. And I don't want people dismissing your book as being, as a lot of people in the mystery and the crime writing world would dismiss it as lightweight, because the expectation, when you have a contract with the reader, when you say I'm delivering a cozy mystery, one, it's an amateur sleuth. Two, it's in a small environment, a small community where you know the other people in it. Yes, good does triumph over evil. You're going to have a satisfying ending, but it's usually a lighter weight subject, and you can address some heavier issues, but much lighter. And I feel that you have a foot in a number of areas under the crime fiction umbrella, historical mystery, suspense. I mean, going into a hospital that you might not come out of, or a sanitarium or whatever. So I would really caution you about using the term cozy, because I would not want readers dismissing you by saying, "Oh, that's just a cozy," because you have a lot of depth in your story. A lot of historical fiction. I know Connie Berry says her books are traditional with a touch of the cozy. But I don't even think that's your case. I think that you have a very serious historical, kind of a balance between the historical, the emphasis on the feminist, you talk about, the witches and such. If you identify it as a cozy, you're going to lose a whole area of the audiences out there, because you do have a much more serious book than your general cozy. So, but anyway, I admire the work that you've put into it. And, I, like I said, I have my copy and I've been, reading it and enjoying it very much. And I wish you lots of luck on succeeding books.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, that is good advice. I didn't initiate the term cozy for my stories. Somebody, it kind of was put in there. I think partly because of the positive ending, and partly because I try to put a bit of humor in there. But I think you've got good advice there. And I like the idea of traditional mystery with a touch of cozy. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Susan. Gottfried has his hand up.
Thank you so much, Susan. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you ever so much. Two things. I also, if I may, and in saying this, I feel totally on your side. I also feel like saying I was somewhat taken aback by the term cozy. because it feels, if I may put it, it feels disrespectful to the work and to your work, and it brings to mind the long list of crime and thriller bestsellers, which are about usually murdered young women, etc., etc., which are terrible, and you are. It feels as if you are taking a most positive stand against this by writing with a deep meaning. And also with a positive ending, but a positive ending. I mean, I was just reading in Marianne Williamson's Return to Love. We know so much about the transformative power of pain. We know so little about the transformative power of joy. That connects with me to when you mention the positive ending, which is much more, which I feel is definitely infinitely more profound than just cozy.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would very much like, I was absolutely fascinated by what you said a moment ago about a character in your novel that, I think, as you put it, that refuses to stay dead. And I mean, many writers have been saying, I feel that what I'm writing has been dictated, or there is, I think Puccini said, my whole opera, Tosca, was, I just wrote down what I was told. I was wondering if you could possibly say a little bit more about that dimension of a character that you have created, that then, from what you've said, seems to take on a life on his own, of his own, and talks back to you, argues with you. Hey, I don't want to be dead. But this process of, well, you also mentioned Jung with Philemon as, we could say, oh, it's just an inner voice, but is it?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a fascinating area, and it absolutely is something that has happened to a lot of writers, that they feel that it has been in some sense dictated. I'm thinking of Coleridge, who dreamed a fantastic poem, got up, wrote it down, but only got as far as about 30 lines before he was interrupted by a knock at the door. And once he got rid of his unwelcome visitor, it had completely gone. And that was the poem Kubla Khan. In my case, the characters, some of the characters just are alive in their own domain, and require to be engaged with at certain times in the story. The example you mentioned comes from the Sacred Well murders, where I thought, well, you've got to have, if you're writing a mystery and you don't want people to get depressed, it's usual to kill off somebody who people don't like very much, the reader might not like very much. So I created a sort of selfish, spoiled, rich American teenager, and unfortunately, after I killed her off, she kind of kept popping back and saying, no, I'm not finished. So somehow I tapped into some energy that couldn't be turned off simply because it was convenient for me to get rid of her. And so she becomes part of the story, and there is some sort of resolution for her at the end of the Sacred Well murders. It's less extreme than that with the other stories, and because I can speak about the stories that I'm currently working on, but there are characters who won't go away when I want them to go away, and things could become very complicated and confusing. So you're working with the need to present something that's going to make sense to the reader, but with all these different energies wanting to kind of get out there and do their thing.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Gottfried, for the question. We have a question by Mimi. Might Jung's idea of the objective psyche apply to the creative process of experiencing the objective aliveness of imaginal characters?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is. And the reason I keep talking about Jungian arts-based research is, I think, well, it is my experience when talking to students, for example, that knowing about Jung's ideas gives people confidence in their relationship with the objective psyche, with their relationship with creative energy. And if you can be liberated from the idea of the ego, if you can be liberated from the idea that it's got to be initiated by you, your conscious being, which is very difficult when you're tired and you don't feel particularly creative. And that's a lot of the time. So, but the idea of the Jungian psyche gives you a kind of break from all that. It's all about me and it's all on me. And you can think, okay, it's there. I've just got to find a way of having a relationship with it today. Thank you, Mimi. Did you want to follow up?
May I? Thank you very much. Yes, it's lovely, and it's a container. Yes. It allows for the container of all these selves that are speaking through you so that you feel you're all right. You're all right. But I also wanted to just add to this a little bit by saying two things about creativity and its contacting, meeting, intermingling with creation, which is what I hear you talking about, is two things. One, that the environmental theorist and educator Chet Bowers said that we need a completely new kind of creativity and definition of creativity that is connected to creation, and we must transcend the very narrow Western, oh, creative art about me. Yes. I mean, I'm not quoting him at all, please, no. But he called for that as necessary for engaging the imagination for any kind of environmental work. So I feel you are very much doing that, for which I thank you. And also just want to add James Hillman's call in the heart of the heart of the thought of the spring of the world, whatever, I can never remember the title, the thought of the heart of the world or the spring. Anyway, where he says we need creativity that does not redeem the individual creative self, but redeems creation itself.
Yes.
And I feel that's what you are moving and creating and letting a genre emerge is what it feels like you're doing. That does that. It has these elements. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. And you've put it better than I could put it myself. And somebody not coincidentally said earlier that this sounded like a class. And of course, I am a teacher. And it's worth mentioning that thanks to Ruler and through Ruler's London Arts-Based Research Centre, I am going to do a short course on Jungian arts-based research in October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be twice a week, and it's going to be evening in the UK. It will be in the morning on the west coast of America, where I am. It's all online, and what I'm hoping is that people will be able to do a short project from start to finish throughout that month, and people will feel enabled to go out and teach it, because that's what I want. I want lots of people teaching exactly what Mimi is talking about. So you know, this is something that is coming up for people who want to delve a bit further.
Mm-hmm. So more information on the course and how to book it should be available by the end of this month. But I recall, Susan, it's going to be every Monday and Thursday, right? So Mondays and Thursdays.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The way I see it is, I mean, I've come up with a simple way of talking about the process, which is the 4 Ps: paradigm, preparation, process, and projectio, which means taking it into the world. And so the idea is that on the Monday, it'll be sort of the ideas and discussion. And on the Thursday, people will present where they've got to, and, you know, basically talk about their own work in the context of the class. And each class will be 90 minutes.
Really looking forward to it. So again, soon we'll fill you in and on all the details. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mimi. We have a question by Glenda. SpacedOutScientist.com, how a tradition spanning millennia became modern chemistry. Alchemy without the soul. Is our major problem behind man-made climate change that matter is seen not to have a soul? That the earth is not respected as a living being, indeed our mother? And Glenda also follows up by saying, that's maybe it's a different comment, Glenda. I once portrayed Parsifal in an experiential myth Gestalt workshop created by Paul. I lost it.
Paul Reveille, he's a dramatist and
Yes.
Gestalt practitioner and based on Jung. But I mean, he's dead now. But that comment was for Vic.
Oh, okay. Sorry. But the question was for Susan, right? Alchemy without the soul.
Well, this is I found that article very interesting. The one I just put up there from the Spaced Out Scientist.
Yeah.
I like chemistry and I like alchemy.
Yeah. I mean, a very simple way of putting this, which I often use as a starting point with my students, is the subject-object split. So we've grown up in a world that assumes that we are separate, that the individual person, the individual human body is separate from everything else. And what we don't realize is that this is actually a cultural way of understanding the world. It's not the truth, because, you know, if that was absolutely true, we wouldn't have gravity, we wouldn't have oxygen, we wouldn't have food, and we wouldn't have families. And, you know, all of these things are essential. We are actually part of the planet. We are actually part of nature. And if you have that perspective, and then obviously everything has a soul, because you know, we are part of it. It is part of us. Where do we think our consciousness came from in the first place? So alchemy is a vision of an ensouled cosmos that lingers and has had profound influences in Western modernity. So the scientists sort of gave up with the soul in matter and turned alchemy into chemistry, but the artists never gave up, because artists know that their materials, whether they are words or paint or sounds, that they are connected to them, the artist, but also they go out and they connect to other people and change other people. And so this idea of the interconnected universe, to a certain extent, has carried on. And I like to call alchemy the Western indigenous, along with astrology and magic, witchcraft, spellcraft. So, those are things that we have links to, even in this 21st century that is very kind of soulless in its controlling attitudes.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. And I especially like the way you presented the scroll, or the way that the scroll was seen as medicinal, artistic, magical, historical, everything. So it was like all the disciplines and all the different modes of knowledge are in it.
Yeah.
And how there was, the idea of the spirit in matter, the spirit in the matter of the scroll, why the replica couldn't really replace the real one. So it's not just about what it says, it's also about what's in it, like literally and physically. So I found that to be a very interesting notion in the novel. Gottfried, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on Susan, on what you just said about the split, which I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I just wanted to throw in, I just found a wonderful quotation by the scientist Erwin Schrödinger. He wrote, "Our perceiving self is nowhere to be found within the world picture, because it itself is the world picture."
Yeah.
And I thought that's I mean, it's stunning coming from a recent scientist, not an alchemist, but it could have come from an alchemist.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. That's terrific. Thank you so much, Gottfried.
Thank you for sharing the lovely quote, Gottfried. I'll just scan through. I don't see any more questions here, but I see like a little chat, comments to each other's comments. So is there anyone who would like to raise their hand and ask another question or say something, give a comment? Mimi.
I do have one more question, and which is, I'm always very curious in all creative works, the origin, the really first moment. And I don't mean the origin of, oh, that's a good idea. I'm sure you understand what I'm asking, Susan, which is the origin of the origin of the origin, the real original condition, the very first, when Coleridge is waking up from his dream moment. What was yours in these books about the elements? I mean, do you have a memory of the initial? I'm always fascinated.
Well, there's the origin of my desire to write stories, which I think was when I was 5, and I learned to read, and I realized that people could write these, and there was a kind of arrival of a desire to write these stories without me really formulating it. However, it took me another 50 years to get started. for all sorts of reasons. But in those 50 years, I did many degrees in literature and learned about Jung and wrote books about Jung and literature and all the rest of it. And I became a feminist, and I became interested in gender. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about how detective fiction has been interested in gender and the idea of the detective as a masculine hero, which women writers have challenged for decades. So you get these different models of the hero in detective fiction itself. And it came to me about 25 years ago that the triple goddess should be a detective. Triple goddess is a mythical form that comes from moon goddesses. People will probably have heard of it as the idea of the crone, the mother, and the maiden. And fairly quickly, and many years ago, this came into me in the form it is in now in these stories, with the crone, that's Mary Wandwalker, and her name in the stories means wind talker, who were old women who talked to the gods. That's in the story. There is another explanation of her name. Caroline, the motherly person who has never had a child, but she has chronic clinical depression. Because for decades, I wanted to write a depressed hero, because it's very rarely done. And I wanted to make someone living with chronic depression, I wanted to explore that heroism, because it is real heroism. And the maiden is Anna, who is in her early 20s, and she's not a maiden because she's never had sex. She's a maiden because she's never had love, because she was trafficked as a child. And so she's a very different kind of maiden, and she's been, she's had an appalling earlier life, which has damaged her. And again, for about 20 years, I've been feeling that the trafficked woman is the woman of our time. The trafficked woman is now. We should all be writing about the trafficked woman. So she's this figure who I can't really understand, because her experience is so far from my own, but that reality needs to be there. So I wanted to have these very different female heroes. The older woman whom everybody, ignores, only Mary doesn't like being ignored. The depressed woman and the trafficked woman. So this trio, that myth, these versions of it, they have been with me for at least 20 years, and I needed other things to kind of come together so that I could actually start writing. And when I started writing, the first story I wrote, the first novel, completely, it wasn't rubbish, but it just totally didn't work. And that was really hard. I spent 2 years writing a novel that didn't work, and I had to start again. And The Alchemy Fire Murder is actually the story that I started second, but it's gone through many revisions. It's gone through 5 years of work to get to this particular form.
Thank you very much. I didn't expect that answer, and it was exquisitely surprising, except for the part about how long we must hold the energy until something tells us, I don't know what it is, I just don't, which is, oh, well, Shakespeare, Hamlet, the readiness is all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But thank you very much for that. That's illuminating.
Thank you, Mimi. Lovely to meet you. And everybody here. It's been a terrific session.
Susan, I want to give a comment on your characters and the way you explore the feminine and the whole notion of the feminine throughout the novel, but especially with your characterization. Your characters are very different. They're so bright, they're so colorful. And there are two characters in particular that aren't major characters, but that kind of struck my attention when it comes to, you know, the modern female or the feminine, or, you know, which of course do not have to be one and the same. But for example, there's Dame Eleanor, who has a very high position at Oxford, but we see that she obviously isn't really a feminist. She's not, you know, the typical woman in power. So we see that she has this kind of resistance to this whole idea of feminism. At some point early on in the novel, she mentions that it doesn't exist. We also have John, the witch, who identifies as John. You know, again, so this idea of the female witch with a female name, and you know, we don't see that. You know, we see that it's quite different. And that was very, very interesting.
John, who has a woman's body. I mean, they turned up very early in a very early version of the book. And this was, in a sense, before trans people were talking more about trans identities, and even before I heard the term non-binary from my students. But there was this John, and John was there and part of what wanted to come into being or come to speak through the medium of the novel. And now I've been working on a fourth story in which John takes a larger part. John and Linda, who are partners, are working on researching weather magic.
Well, that's great to know, because I really liked the character of John. And it would be great to see more of John in the next novel or novels. So thank you. And where do you get your inspiration from for characters? Are any of them based on real people in real life? Dream images, maybe? Or do they just have a life of their own and they show up?
Well, my three detectives, like I said, I've kind of had a sense of them for a very long time, and the others kind of mainly just show up. So there isn't a sort of conscious, what kind of character do I want here? I mean, sometimes I think that I need to be careful about the mix of characters, and that's something that is a factor. But I absolutely don't think about people in real life. I'm sure aspects of people in real life do turn up, but I absolutely don't do that. That doesn't feel right to me. It isn't how it works for me.
And it actually feels that way, by the way. I mean, the characters do feel very real in their own realm, in their own ways of existence and all that. So thank you for another bright work, and really looking forward to the next one. I'm going to ask about the themes, but I'm going to ask the audience. So for those of you who have read the novel or parts of the novel, if you could write down as many themes that pop up into your mind about the novel. So what are some of the themes that you find in the Alchemy fire murder? And of course, there could be much more than one theme. So it would be interesting to have a look at how the audience read it. Let's see. Got some coming up. No. Oh, these are older messages. Okay. This isn't about the theme, but Teresa mentioned earlier Hecate, the three-headed goddess, shamans, midwives, death, and birth. So Teresa, you'd probably see those also as themes, right? Death, birth, midwives.
Well,
Grace, loyalty.
Yeah. Yes, there is quite a lot about loyalty in the book and about what you might be loyal to, especially if you are in a disadvantaged situation. So Dame Eleanor, for example, proves to have a few skeletons in the closet, and it's again comes out of her own background and her own struggles in her early life, and how one disadvantaged group in America might be exploited by white supremacists, and so on and so forth. So prejudice is definitely a theme, racial prejudice, and clearly there's a sort of feminist thing there.
Aaron says hunger for knowledge versus wisdom versus.
Yes, very nice, very nice.
Grace says commitment.
Thank you, Grace. Yep, that's right. That's right. There is a sort of, there is a kind of struggle, a kind of primal struggle, really, between the three detectives as to how committed they are to each other and to being detectives, and what that commitment actually means. Yeah.
All right. I would also say companionship.
Yes. Yes.
There's so much about companionship and the different types and the different levels.
Yeah. Yeah, people have said, you're always writing about families, and that's true. I am very interested in kind of expanding the idea of family and people who make families, as opposed to just carry on with the families they're born into.
Yeah, there's a lot of chosen, the idea of the chosen family in the novel, in both novels, actually.
Yeah.
How the past affects the present, says Grace.
Again, that's something I'm very, very interested in terms of one's individual past, but also the more distant past. And I think that's a big deal in the 21st century, as we come to terms with some visitations from the past, from past things that we have done.
Right. Would anyone else like to give it a go? Oh, Rebecca. Rebecca's hand is up.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Oh gosh, where's my camera? Oh, I have a thing on there. There. Hi.
Hey.
Bright light. What a great conversation. I'm really appreciating this. I love the book. And this idea of themes and the past and the present. One of the things that really gripped me to want to read this is about this possibility of alchemy in America. And so that theme of the past, and one of my questions is, how did you come upon that book, Prosperous America? Was that a synchronicity?
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, so maybe just with that alone, because I'm curious about the structure.
Yeah.
Wrote about of the alchemical.
Let me just show you. Right. Okay, this is the book. I'm going to get rid of my screen here so I can actually show you properly. Amazingly, come on, don't do that to me. it was entirely, you could say, a coincidence that Joel Whitehouse, my wonderful poet and terrific husband, found this in a bookstore, and it's called Prospero's America. And I really, really, really like The Tempest. I've always liked The Tempest. And so he got this for me, and I read it. It's a gripping story. And like most people, I did not know that there had been alchemists from Europe in America doing alchemy. And this is, as you realize, Rebecca, really interesting for us, because Jung was really into these alchemists and saw alchemy as a precursor of psychotherapy. And in fact, this guy, John Winthrop Jr., knew the alchemists that Jung wrote about. So he knew Elias Ashmole, who founded the Ashmolean in Oxford, and who published a famous book on alchemy that Jung writes about in the collected works. So here's a link with Jung. And alchemy is something that we're very interested in the depth psychology and Jungian, and James Hillman was into alchemy and all the rest of it. But nobody really talks about the fact that there actually was this alchemist here. It's not very well known. So that really stuck in my mind. And that was a major inspiration for this story. And I suppose when I'm thinking of starting our story, I'm asking what I often say to my students when we're doing active imagination: what wants to come through? What wants to come through? So I'm looking inside and saying, what wants to come through into a story? What's there that really wants to be out there? And this idea of the 17th century English person who goes and lives in America and is part of the early colonial period, and who is a real alchemist who knew all these people, that just had to come through. That had to be in the story.
Maybe drove the story in some ways.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, because I liked the first book, but I loved this book, I think, for that sense of possibility. Yeah. And that idea that Mimi talked about needing a new kind of creativity, a new definition for creativity, and that environmental work, it's moving to me and exciting to think about. That makes me want to get that book. So I have a kind of another question about the alchemical thing in terms of your writing process. When you, like the stages in the book of the alchemy, when it went to Solucio and Calcinaccio, did you have that structure ahead of time, or did it unfold?
No,
how did that work in your writing?
I didn't, and I wasn't going to use that, but I've been teaching alchemy quite a bit at Pacifica, and there is this Jung, there's a point in Collected Works Volume 12 where Jung lists all these alchemy processes, 12 of them. And I've seen things online where, there are 7 stages of alchemy. There are 5 stages, whatever. Well, Jung sensibly says that, there's lots of stages, and there isn't a set order, and, but this is typically what the alchemists were doing. And so I thought it would be interesting to see if in any way that did correspond to things that were happening in the story. And I found that was that there was something that fitted there. So I decided to include those 12 stages as parts of the story.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about your class. It sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Yes, I did it.
Hearing about
It's a class on the MA program, which is now called Depth Psychology and Creativity, and it's a class on technology and the psyche. And of course, alchemy and technology have a very interesting relationship.
Well, in your class here with Rula Maria, it sounds wonderful.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. That's
Yeah.
going to be the Jungian arts-based research course.
Yeah.
I see Aaron's question about Foucault's pendulum, and I've read Foucault's pendulum, and I'm not aware of consciously thinking about it, but I guess it's part of my own background. Yeah. What I love about Foucault's pendulum is when the wife or girlfriend says, "Now look, dear, all this stuff, it's really about a woman's body." And all these wonderful synchronicities and correspondences, this is your imagination, and that's a very interesting possibility to put into the book at that point. So you get this tension between this very mystical vision and this very concrete version of it. Glenda.
Glenda, yeah, I see your hand up.
Hi, I put a comment about synchronicity in the chat. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just saying that
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Right. It's I was thinking about my
Yeah.
own personal synchronicity here, and that ancestors of mine that I researched, the Platt family, who came from England with their minister to in 38, they came to New Haven. They went on to buy land and set up the military colony. Now, John Winthrop Jr. must have been there at the same time as he brought many of the separate colonies together. So I was thinking my ancestors actually knew this character. And I was thinking that, given that we're all one, that everything is connected, that do you ever think that maybe ancestors of yours are influencing you and want certain work done? Or a part in some direction?
That's a great thought. And I haven't thought about that. I haven't really researched my own family. My sister has done some of this research. I'm quite glad that, as far as we could tell, we go back to peasants in the 19th century who just lived on farms and worked the land. But that is a very interesting thought, Glenda, and I think it is again, it's part of this complex interweaving of possibilities and synchronicities and creativities that we have this. Yeah. I think we should possibly be drawing this to a close. I'm sure Rula has got many other things that she needs to be doing.
This is absolutely fine. And I want to thank you so much, Susan, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss your work. And I know we could just go on and on and on. There's just so much. This is such a rich novel. It's so informative as it is entertaining. It's a page turner, whether you're using real pages or the Kindle. And we're really looking forward to your next book. Susan will be speaking this weekend at our Creative Psyche and Art Space Research Conference. So Susan is our keynote speaker. Susan will also be presenting at another conference later this month, the Mysteries and Histories Conference. So if you have a knack for mystery writing or histories or anything related to research and creativity that surrounds the whole notion of historical writing and mystery writing, then that's on the 24th of June. It's going to be an online conference on the first day, and the second day we're going to be meeting for a mystery tour here in London. So we're going to be walking around, and then we'll have lunch or something. So if you feel like joining, just drop me a line and let us know so that we could add your name to the list of people joining the trip. It's 2 more days, actually maybe a day and a half, before the 10th of June, which is when we close our submissions window for the proposals for Eco-Poetics, our Eco-Poetics conference, which is going to be here at Kew Gardens, London. It's also going to be online, so if you'd like to participate or just attend, again, let us know. And of course, Susan's course is coming up soon this fall. And well, this is a little, it's not really a secret, but we're just letting you know. This little group is going to know about this a bit ahead of the others, but soon you will hear about our Alchemy conference, which is to take place also by the end of October or early November. So we hope to see you there, and we hope you can make it, whether virtually or in person. But we're working on it, and we'll let you know about all the information related to, you know, how to book and what it's about and all that. So, and I don't know, Susan, maybe we could go on a little tour, an Alchemy fire murder tour around in Oxford or something.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Susan. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for all the great support. Thank you for the brilliance. And we hope to see you again very, very soon. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night or good day. Bye.